Okay, so it's week 3, and we've collectively set up our first page to read data. So before we can actually see if this page works, we need to connect to our AWS database, and we need to create the table that we were working with last week. So I'm going to make sure I'm connected to OpenVPN. I'm going to open up my SQL Workbench. I've already got my credentials saved. And the instructions for how to do this are on D2L inside of Weekly Learning and Tools and Resources. So I'll run my use command, and then I'm going to go and grab the script from last week. So if I go back to my lesson 2 folder, we have the SQL script that we need to build the table in our database.
Runes.
Okay, we'll try again. So I'm going to copy from last week. We have this insert SQL script inside of lesson 2. I'm going to copy my create table, alter table, and describe commands. So I'll just grab those and copy. I'll paste them into my query window and execute the script. So this will build the copy of the artist table in AWS. Inside lesson 2, the item that's called insert SQL script. So this should give you your own copy of the artist table in your database. Just copy and paste the script and execute it. If you need a hand, let me know or let Ken know. Are you connected to the VPN? You always have to connect to the VPN first. To check my table now, I'm just going to run our SQL query that group 3 put in our Word document. So the query is select star from artists. So when I run it, I get this result, and it's an empty grid, right? It's a brand new table, so of course there's no data in it. So what I want to do is first, before we can actually try this page to see if it works, we need to insert some records into the table. Well, the easy way to do that is we can use the form and save page we built last week. So I'm going to open up my save page from last week. And I'm going to change my connection to use my new AWS database. So in your save page, you can do the same thing. So instead of connecting to the loosefoot database that we used together last week, change the save page so that your connection is pointing to your AWS database. Now I want to start my web server. I'm just going to run this on my local web server for now. And I'll save some artists using my form and save page we built last week. So if I open up XAMPP, I want to start the Apache server. I don't need the local MySQL server. We're using the AWS MySQL server for the database. But now my web server is running. So I want to use my browser to load our form that we built last week and see if we can save So I want to open up the artist form we built last week. So last week we worked with this and it was working, but it was saving to the shared database on the loosefoot server. So I'm going to re-enter I'll try entering an artist, and then I can go back to my SQL workbench and see if this gets saved to AWS. You can enter any values you like. So I got a message saying it was saved. If I want to check this, I can go back to Workbench, and I'll run my select star from artist query. So I'll just highlight that line and execute it. And now I've got one artist with the ID of 10,000 in my database. I'm going to add a couple others. And then I'll make sure that all of these show up in my database. Then we can try out the code that you guys, oops, I didn't mean to save that, but okay. So now I have 3 records. One of them is incomplete. So again, in my save page, I change my connection to use my AWS server. I started my local Apache server. And then I loaded the file in my browser using my localhost web server. I could also put these I could upload these pages to the AWS web server, and I could run them from the live server if I wanted to. I'll try that as well. It's a little faster to use the local server because it means if we change the files, we don't have to keep re-uploading them. But I'll also try it through FileZilla to upload. So I'm going to go to my AWS connection. And I'm just going to upload my whole music library folder inside of public HTML. And then if I want, I can try this out in using the live server. So here's our public IP, 15.22.122.23. And then it's my username. And my folder. So now here's my online copy of the exact same pages. If I load my artist form, I'll try to save. And now if I look at my database, I've got 4 artists. So it doesn't really matter if I serve the pages with my local web server or I serve them from the AWS web server. In both cases, they're connecting to the AWS database. So the data gets stored on AWS. So I've saved some, basically so far all I've done is repeat what we did last week. Now I want to try this page that we created collaboratively and see what happens when we try to fetch the list of artists and then display them in the browser. Let's run it and see what we get. So if I go to back to my root, I'll open up the unformatted page. Here's what we got. Now we're close, right? We didn't get a connection error, so that means the database connection is good. We didn't actually get an error writing the query either, so we got the same error 4 times. There's 4 records in my database, so this suggests it's actually fetching the records properly because I got the same error repeated, so this error is happening inside this loop. So what is this telling us? We've got an array to string conversion error, and it's happening on line 25. So where we're trying to display each artist, this code is not quite complete. We're going to have to modify it a bit. So what it's saying is value represents an array. So we can't just echo out that whole array. That's where this code is failing on line 25. What if we just want to, let's say, display the artist name values only? We would have to add something on this line. Anybody want to take a guess how we would do it? Nick? Okay, let's try that. So what if we print out the first column? I'll just save that. All right, so now we're getting some data. So when we use column 0, that's the artist ID column. Now, showing the ID columns isn't super helpful. What maybe do we want to show instead? Okay, yeah, probably showing the artist name is a lot more meaningful. So there's 2 ways we could do it. We'd obviously want to change this. What are the 2 things we could change it to? Okay, we could try it as a 1 instead. All right. So that gives us second column for each record. Now, this isn't advisable. It's the shortest way to code it, and normally coding things with as few little typing as possible is a good idea. How else could we do it? How else could you refer to the element in an array other than by its index? The index is more efficient and less typing, but it's also less clear. How else could you refer to how else could we refer to the name column besides index 1? How could we explicitly refer to the column by its name? So in single quotes, we can use the column name. The end result, if I refresh, is exactly the same. I would recommend this. So both of these work, they give us the same result. Y is using value 1, probably not advisable. And why would I recommend you use value name instead? There's a couple of reasons. I'm sorry, Julian. Exactly. So first of all, if somebody modifies the table structure and adds a column before name, name is no longer column 1. So that will break this code. And second of all, we might have a lot of columns in the table. There's no limit to how many different values we're outputting. Referring them by value 1, value 2, value 3, it's not clear which columns those represent, especially if someone else is looking at the code, as Jillian said. So you can use this structure. It's not a good practice in PHP. We should be explicitly naming the columns we want to display. What if I do let's say I write line 25 like this. There's 3 possible things that could happen. It could display the name value, the page could be blank, or we could get an error. Which one of those do you think will happen if I reload the page like this? You think it'll be an error? Okay, what will the error suggest? Column name doesn't exist? Okay, well, let's try it. So I'll save that change. You're right. So wherever you see undefined index in PHP, that means you're trying to reference an element in an array by a name that doesn't exist. So the name has to match exactly, and it's case sensitive as well. My database name is all lowercase. It's my PHP code. I try to output these values with an uppercase N. We're going to get that same error of undefined index. Right. So it's a from the yes, I think you've answered your own question. So it's good and it's bad, Leo. It's good that it's less error prone. In my experience, naming the columns is critical because many times our tables are really large. We may have 20, 30, 100 columns. And if you don't explicitly name them, it's almost impossible to keep track of which value am I trying to display. Here's a really common example. I'll show you an application. It wasn't written in PHP, but where we had to do this. I don't maintain this site anymore, but some students who used to work for me, we built this original site. We'll see if we can actually see a sample of what's in here. Right. Can I click on this? So in here, this site is a database of the 90,000 registered charities in Canada. So every year, every charity, so including the college, has a charitable foundation. If you want to donate to the college, for example, they have to submit a tax return. That tax return has about 200 fields in it. And each one of those fields is a number. So in the database, the table that we built to hold this, the field names are like 1,000, 1,001, 1,002, 1,003. And we've got to generate reports where anybody could go in, look up a charity, and see their annual tax returns with all the values. You could imagine how difficult that would be to distinguish one line from the other if you just called them value 1, value 2, value 3 in the array. It would be impossible to know what any individual field represented. So much better to explicitly use the column names. But that also means we want to be consistent about how we name things. So I know in my MySQL database, I'm never going to start a column name with a capital letter. So in my PHP script, if I'm referring to any column, it will always start with lowercase. And if it's multiple words, I'll always use camel case. I want to be consistent in how I name things in my database and in my PHP code. Okay, so our code here works quite well. You guys did a really good job. The only thing we actually had to change to get this to work was we just needed to add on the name of the column. We couldn't output the whole array. The rest of the code that you guys wrote all works perfectly. Now our page doesn't look very good. Right? All we're doing is spitting out the names across the screen. There's no formatting to this at all. So what I'd like to do is make a new page, same logic, but we're going to want to add a bunch of HTML formatting so that we can show the artist list more in this structure. We want to show a grid of rows and columns with column headings where we have some formatting to it. So we're going to reuse all the code we have here, but we've got to add a bunch of HTML inside of it. So our page is going to be a combination of our PHP query, but we're going to include HTML in the output. So I'm going to highlight all the code and copy it. I'm going to make a new PHP file. And I'll just call this one artists list. I'm going to paste everything in here because most of this process is the same. We're going to connect to the database. We're going to execute the same query, run the query, fetch the results. But what we want to do before we loop through and print out all the artists, we want to open up, create a grid, and create a row with column headings. Then underneath the headings, we want to loop, print out all the artists, and not just the name, we want to print out the name, the year, and the website as well. We won't worry about the IDs. Normally, we don't show ID numbers to our end users. So we'll add a step in here. So what kind of HTML tag do we need to create a grid? There isn't a grid tag. There's a different tag that generates rows and columns. Yep. Thank you. So we'll create a table. And then we need a table header row. And we want 3 column headings. What tags should we use in our header row to create those 3 column headings? So we're going to put it in PH tags. So our first column heading will be name. And we'll open another set of TH tags. So we want this to happen before the loop. It doesn't go inside the for each loop. We only want one heading row. We don't want to print the heading for each artist. The headings come before the list of artists. And then somewhere we would need to close our table. We've opened it here. Where should we close the table? Yeah, so when our loop is done, so right now it looks like this. Still printing my data at the top of the screen, but we've got 3 columns, name, year, and website. The data isn't in the table yet. So we're going to have to do some more formatting. What are we going to need to do in here on line 29, where we're printing out the data from our query results? So we're going to need to add several things on this line. What needs to get added? Remember when we refresh, it still prints the artists up here. And it's only printing the artist names. So we want to complete this whole grid. Yep. Well, we don't have the song, but we do want to print. Yeah, we want to also, so we're only printing the name. So we also want to print the year founded and the website values. And how do we put those values into individual cells in the table? You got it. Good answer. So inside the loop, for every artist, the first thing we're going to do is create a new row. And then create a new cell. So we use TR and TD. And then we want to put the name in the first cell. So we're going to open the first cell, insert the artist name, and close the first cell. What will we do next? What should be here after that first cell ends? Remember, we've got 3 cells per row. 8. Yeah, so let's open a new column. And then how would we display the year founded? What code would we need after the $sign? So this is going to print the name value. So what would print the year founded value? Exactly. So we're going to refer to the year founded element in the array. And then we'll repeat. We'll close the second cell. And we're just going to repeat this one more time. And what do we need at the very end? So we've created 3 sets of TD tags. Each set of TD tags has a PHP value inside it. What needs to go at the very end here? Right, we need to end the row. Because when we're finished printing out one artist, we want to stop the row so the next artist will appear on the new line. Something like that. So if we view the source, here's our table, our heading row, and then our loop creates new row with 3 new columns and injects each array value into its own column. If we want, we could add a tiny bit of formatting up here on line 24 in my table tag. I'll just add a border, and then at least we get some grid lines. So it's not a beautiful looking table, but it is a functional one. So all of the logic is the same from our unformatted page and this page. Anytime we're displaying results from the database, it's the same process. Connect to the database, write and execute a query of what we want to fetch, and then figure out how are we printing it to the screen and what kind of HTML formatting do we want to use around the data. In this case, we wanted to put it in a grid. So we used table, TR, and TD. I've been building web applications for 20 years now. I've never built an application that doesn't have at least one page like this. Every website you go to will have data in a grid form. Not every page, but somewhere in there, there's a table of rows and columns. Because it's the easiest way for us to show the contents of a database, because the database stores our information in rows and columns. So this is just a PHP representation of our database. Okay. Does anybody have questions about what we're doing on this page so far? Is there anything that you're not clear on that doesn't really make sense that we should go over a bit more? Nick? Oh, sorry, what are all the periods for? Okay. Can anybody explain the periods? Magnus? Exactly. So PHP has 2 really weird syntax features that most languages don't have. This is one of them. So most languages use a plus to concatenate strings. PHP uses a dot. Which also, I guess we should talk about this operator. We've used it, but we haven't talked about it. So in most languages, we have so in Java or C#, we use dot notation, right? We refer to an object, and then we can call a property or call a method. We can't use this syntax in PHP because PHP decided to use dots for concatenation instead, which is dumb. So when we actually have an object and we want to call a method in PHP, we use these two characters instead, the dash greater than. So this is the PHP equivalent of this. So we have for example, a DB object. We're calling the prepare method of that object. So we've got dash greater than. Same here. Our command has an execute method, dash greater than. And our command also has a fetch all. So PHP uses a dot instead of a plus and a dash greater than instead of a dot, where you see it in other languages. Yeah, I think they figured we're just too late. So once they use well, this is older because this is procedural PHP, which originally PHP didn't have any notion of objects. So it has used the dot for concatenation from the beginning. Once it started introducing the idea of objects, they couldn't use this because the dot was already meant for concatenation. So they had to come up with some kind of other operator to use for calling object methods or properties. So they came up with this syntax instead. Okay. So the idea here is our HTML table, it's really just like wrapping or packaging. No different if you're going to take a gift to somebody, you have different ways of packaging that gift. You can put it in a bag, you can wrap it in wrapping paper, you could wrap it in newspaper. Our query result is the same, but in this case, we're just packaging it in a grid. So here's an example of a commonly used grid. Actually, you can probably see them here. So here we've got, annual financial data in grid format. We use it all the time. Let's actually have a look here. So here would be a common example of an HTML table we might see anywhere where we're going to list data. We're going to find an HTML table. So here'd be a common example of a table, a grid of rows and columns, right? So this is querying the Sportsnet database and outputting in a loop rows and columns. Later on, we'll add some CSS to our table so it looks a little better. We'll also look at adding functionality like this, so we can click on a column heading and have it sort up or down. There's some simple open source JavaScript libraries that we could add to our page that will automatically allow users to click on the name, the year, or the website and sort up or down. We could add one more little feature to this. What if we wanted to make these links active? Right now, you'd have to highlight it, copy it, and open it. But we could probably modify our code a bit so these are actually active links. What would we need to do? We need to add something on line 29 so the user could just click on that URL and it would open. Okay, so we'd need an A tag. Where would we want the A tag to go? Where would you put the A tag? You're right, Magnus. We got 3 of them. Which one? Right. If we put an A tag around this, then those links would become active. So we're running out of space on this line. So what I'll do here is let's put in our code's going to get a bit confusing, so stay with me. So around our website, we're going to wrap it inside of an anchor tag, but the href is dynamic. So we've got to go in and out of the quotes in order to make that link dynamic. So we start our href attribute with a double quote, but then we need to close our single quote here so we can insert our PHP array value. I've added the target equals new, so it'll open a new tab rather than going to the new page in our current browser tab. So we need the value website twice, once for the text on the link and once for the href property. And again, that's a double quote followed by a single quote here. And over here, it's the opposite. Single quote followed by a double quote. Let's see what happens. Okay, so they look like links. Do they actually work? All right, seems to. So again, we're adding some more HTML wrapping and formatting around the values that come out of our query. If these were email addresses, we could use ahref tags, and we would just need to insert mail to. And that way we would have active email links. So you do have to be careful with your quotations here. So any literal HTML goes inside of single quotes. Any values from our array have to be outside of the single quote because those are dynamic values, they're not literal text. Okay. I'm also just going to I'm going to upload this file to AWS. I'll just try it on the server as well. So I'll upload my list and try it on AWS. And it works here as well. Here's our code. Okay, it's 10 to 10. I will upload what we've done so far. Keep in mind, my code has my AWS credentials. So if you use it or want it, then you'll want to put your own username and password and database name in. Okay, we will take a break for 10 minutes.